Greetings horror fans and welcome to our countdown of the top 5 rules that make a good horror movie or game. Whether you're a die-hard horror enthusiast or just looking to get spooked, this video is for you. Throughout history, horror has evolved and transformed into a beloved genre that keeps us on the edge of our seats. But what are the key ingredients that make a horror story truly scary? In this video, we will be exploring the top 5 rules of horror and who said them. From the masters of horror such as Stephen King and Wes Craven to the classic films that have stood the test of time, these rules are guaranteed to make your horror story a bone-chilling success. So, buckle up and get ready to uncover the secrets behind the world's scariest movies and games. Let's dive into the top 5 rules for making a spooky good horror movie or game. Number 1. Less is more. The principle of less is more is a key component in creating effective horror. It suggests that the scariest things are often those that are only hinted at, rather than shown outright. This approach allows the audience's imagination to run wild, creating a sense of suspense and unease that can be more effective than any jump scare or gore-filled scene. Alfred Hitchcock, the legendary director of classic horror films such as Psycho and The Birds, was a master of this technique. He believed that by withholding information and only showing the audience glimpses of the horror, he could create a more powerful and lasting impact. So, how can you apply this principle to your own horror writing or filmmaking? Here are a few tips. Use suggestion, not exposition. Instead of explaining everything to the audience, leave things up to their imagination. Suggest the horror rather than showing it outright. For example, instead of showing the monster in all its glory, show only a shadow or a glimpse of its silhouette. This can create a sense of unease and uncertainty that can be more effective than a full reveal. Create atmosphere. The atmosphere of your story or film can be just as important as the scares themselves. Use lighting, sound, and setting to create a sense of dread and tension. For example, dimly lit rooms, creaking floorboards, and ominous music can all contribute to a sense of unease and anticipation. Use misdirection. Misdirection can be a powerful tool in horror storytelling. By leading the audience to expect one thing and then delivering something else entirely, you can create a sense of surprise and shock. For example, you might lead the audience to expect a jump scare from a certain direction, only to have the scare come from a completely unexpected source. Allow the audience to fill in the blanks. By leaving certain details up to the audience's imagination, you can create a sense of uncertainty and unease. For example, instead of showing a character's gruesome death in graphic detail, you might show only their reaction to what's happening off-screen. This allows the audience to imagine the horror for themselves, creating a more personal and impactful experience. Embrace the unknown. The fear of the unknown can be one of the most powerful tools in horror storytelling. By leaving certain questions unanswered, you can create a sense of mystery and intrigue that keeps the audience engaged. For example, you might leave the origin or motivation of the horror unexplained, allowing the audience to speculate and imagine their own theories. In conclusion, the principle of less is more is a crucial tool in creating effective horror. By using suggestion, creating atmosphere, using misdirection, allowing the audience to fill in the blanks, and embracing the unknown, you can create a sense of suspense and unease that can be more powerful than any jump scare or gore-filled scene. Remember that the audience's imagination is often more terrifying than anything you can show them outright, so use that to your advantage. And, like Alfred Hitchcock, always remember that the scariest things are often those that are only hinted at, not shown in full. Number 2. Make the audience care about the characters. When you watch a horror movie or play a horror game, what keeps you invested? What makes you care about what happens to the characters? It's not just the jump scares or the gore, it's the emotional connection you have with the characters. The principle of make the audience care about the characters is crucial to creating effective horror. Without that emotional connection, the audience won't be invested in the characters' fates, and the scares won't be as impactful. This principle is often credited to horror writer Stephen King, who has said that good horror always has to have a strong emotional component, or it doesn't work. So, how do you make the audience care about the characters in a horror story? Here are a few tips. Give them relatable personalities. The characters in your horror story should feel like real people with real personalities, quirks, and flaws. They don't have to be perfect, but they should be relatable in some way. Think about the people in your own life. What makes them unique and interesting? Use those qualities to create characters that the audience can connect with. Establish their relationships. One of the most effective ways to create an emotional connection with the characters is to establish their relationships with each other. Are they friends? Family? lovers, colleagues? By showing how they interact with each other and how they feel about each other, you can create a sense of camaraderie and empathy that will make the audience care about what happens to them. Show their vulnerabilities. Everyone has weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and your characters should be no exception. By showing their fears, insecurities, and weaknesses, you make them more relatable and human. And when the audience sees them in danger, they'll be more invested in their survival. Give them a backstory. The characters in your horror story should have a backstory that informs who they are and why they're in the situation they're in. This doesn't have to be a lengthy exposition dump, but a few well-placed details can go a long way in creating a sense of history and depth. Make them active participants. Ineffective horror often features passive characters who simply react to the scares happening around them. Instead, make your characters active participants in the story. Give them agency and allow them to make decisions that affect the plot. This will make them feel more real and engaging, and the audience will be more invested in their journey. By following these tips, you can create characters that the audience will care about and root for. But why is this emotional connection so important in horror? Simply put, when the audience cares about the characters, the stakes are higher. They're invested in their survival, and the scares become more intense because they don't want to see anything bad happen to them. And when bad things inevitably do happen, it's more impactful and emotional because the audience has formed a bond with the characters. This principle isn't just limited to horror, either. It applies to all forms of storytelling. Whether you're writing a drama, a romance, or a comedy, the audience needs to care about the characters in order for the story to be effective. In conclusion, the principle of make the audience care about the characters is crucial to creating effective horror. By giving the characters relatable personalities, establishing their relationships, showing their vulnerabilities, giving them a backstory, and making them active participants, you can create characters that the audience will care about and invest in. And when bad things inevitably happen to them, the scares become more intense and emotional because the audience has formed a bond with the characters. So, the next time you're writing a horror story, remember to make the audience care about the characters. It's the key to creating. Number 3. Establish a sense of place. Establishing a sense of place is a crucial element in creating effective horror. The setting of a horror story can create a mood of foreboding and isolation, and can make the audience feel like they are a part of the world of the story. This principle is often attributed to John Carpenter, the legendary horror director who used the small town of Haddonfield, Illinois as a haunting and eerie location in his classic film Halloween. So, how can you apply this principle to your own horror writing or filmmaking? Here are a few tips. Use descriptive language. When describing the setting of your horror story, use descriptive language that creates a sense of mood and atmosphere. For example, instead of simply saying that a room is dark, you might describe it as lightless and oppressive, the shadows twisting and writhing like living things. Create a sense of history. A place with a sense of history can add depth and richness to your horror story. Create a backstory for the setting that includes hints of past horrors or tragedies. For example, a haunted house might have a history of mysterious disappearances or deaths that still linger in the minds of the townspeople. Use the setting to create isolation. Isolation can be a powerful tool in horror storytelling, as it creates a sense of vulnerability and helplessness in the characters. Use the setting to create a feeling of being cut off from the outside world. For example, a remote cabin in the woods or a small, isolated island can create a sense of being completely alone in the face of horror. Use the setting to create a sense of dread. The setting of your horror story can create a mood of foreboding and unease. Use elements of the setting to create a sense of impending danger or doom. For example, an abandoned asylum might have a feeling of oppressive dread, with broken windows and rusted metal doors that seem to be waiting to slam shut at any moment. Make the setting a character in its own right. The setting of your horror story can take on a life of its own, becoming a character in its own right. Use the setting to create a sense of personality and mood that is as important as any of the human characters in the story. For example, a decaying mansion might seem to be alive with its own malevolent spirit, as the walls seem to whisper and the doors creak open of their own accord. Some examples of horror movies that have effectively established a sense of place are The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, and The Babadook, directed by Jennifer Kent. In The Shining, the Overlook Hotel is as much a character as Jack Torrance, the protagonist. The hotel's eerie and isolated location, coupled with its dark past, creates an overwhelming sense of dread throughout the film. The Babadook takes place in a small, dark house, which serves as a metaphor for the main character's grief and trauma. The setting is ominous, with dark corners and strange noises, and it adds to the sense of danger and foreboding. Video games also use the principle of establishing a sense of place to create immersive horror experiences. Silent Hill 2, developed by Konami, is a prime example. The game takes place in the foggy, eerie town of Silent Hill, where the protagonist is searching for his dead wife. The town is unsettling, with a sense of isolation and danger around every corner. The town's layout is confusing, and the player is constantly disoriented, adding to the feeling of being lost and alone. Amnesia, The Dark Descent, developed by Frictional Games, also effectively establishes a sense of place. The game takes place in a dark and decaying castle, with the protagonist suffering from amnesia, adding to the player's sense of confusion and unease. One of the most iconic examples of horror setting is the Blair Witch Project, directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. The film is shot in a found footage style, with the setting being the woods of Burkittsville, Maryland. The woods are a character in their own right, with their twisted trees, confusing paths, and strange noises. The isolation and danger of the woods add to the film's sense of terror, as the characters are lost and alone, with no way to escape. In conclusion, establishing a sense of place is a crucial tool in creating effective horror. By using descriptive language, creating a sense of history, using the setting to create isolation and dread, and making the setting a character in its own right, you can create a world that is as terrifying as it is immersive. Remember that the setting can be just as important as the scares themselves, and that the right setting can create a mood of unease and foreboding that lingers long after the story is over. So take your time to create a world that is both eerie and immersive, and your horror story will be all the more effective for it. Number 4. Use sound and music to create tension. In horror, sound and music can make all the difference between a mediocre scare and a bone-chilling experience. The use of sound can create a sense of unease, build tension, and amplify the impact of visual scares. This rule is often credited to the legendary composer Bernard Herrmann, who revolutionized the use of music in horror films. Herrmann's work on Psycho is a prime example of how sound and music can enhance the horror experience. The famous shower scene, in which the protagonist is brutally murdered, is iconic not only for its visual imagery but also for its sound. The shrieking violins and stabbing, screeching strings create a visceral sense of panic and dread that is still effective today, but sound and music can also be used more subtly to create tension and suspense. The use of ambient noise, like creaking doors or dripping water, can make the audience feel like they are in the same spooky location as the characters. Quiet, eerie tones can signal that something is about to happen, building anticipation and dread. Sudden, loud sounds can startle the audience and make them jump in their seats. One recent example of excellent use of sound in horror is the film A Quiet Place. In the movie, a family must navigate a post-apocalyptic world in which creatures with hypersensitive hearing hunt and kill anything that makes noise. As a result, the movie is almost entirely silent, except for a few crucial sounds that build tension and amplify the horror. The audience is forced to sit in near silence, listening for every creak or breath. Just like the characters in the movie, music can also be used to great effect in horror, both to create mood and to signal the arrival of danger. The composer for The Exorcist, Mike Oldfield, used ominous, chanting vocals and eerie sound effects to create a sense of evil and dread. The iconic theme from Jaws, composed by John Williams, signaled the arrival of the shark and created a sense of impending doom. And the electronic music in Halloween, composed by director John Carpenter himself, has become synonymous with horror and suspense. Another example of effective use of sound and music can be seen in the horror game Silent Hill 2. The game's composer, Akira Yamaoka, used a combination of eerie sound effects and haunting music to create a sense of dread and isolation. The sound design also played a key role in the game's horror mechanics, with the player being able to hear the approaching monsters before actually seeing them. The horror film The Exorcist is another example of sound and music being used to great effect. The composer, Jack Nitzsche, incorporated unsettling sounds such as creaking doors and rattling chains into the score. These sounds, combined with the haunting main theme, created a sense of dread and fear that lingered long after the movie ended. More recently, the horror film Hereditary used sound and music to create a haunting and unsettling atmosphere. The composer, Colin Stetson, incorporated dissonant sounds and eerie chanting into the score, which added to the sense of unease throughout the film. The use of sound in the film was so effective that it left many viewers feeling disturbed and unsettled long after the movie ended. In summary, the use of sound and music is a crucial element of horror storytelling. From the subtle use of ambient noise to the iconic themes that have become synonymous with the genre, sound and music can create tension, amplify scares, and enhance the overall horror experience. Herrmann's legacy in the horror genre is a testament to the power of sound and music, and his influence can be felt in countless horror movies and games to this day. Number 5. Subvert expectations. Horror is a genre that relies heavily on certain conventions and tropes, such as jump scares, creepy sound effects, and dark, foreboding settings. However, to truly stand out in the crowded horror landscape, it's often necessary to subvert these expectations and take the audience on a journey they weren't expecting. This principle of subverting expectations is often attributed to Jordan Peele, who has gained critical acclaim for his innovative and thought-provoking horror films. Peele's movies, such as Get Out and Us, use horror conventions as a jumping-off point, but then take unexpected twists and turns that keep the audience guessing. One of the ways Peele subverts expectations is by exploring deeper themes and issues through his horror stories. Get Out uses the horror of racism to comment on the pervasive and insidious nature of white supremacy, while Us uses doppelgangers to examine the dark underbelly of the American dream. By layering social commentary onto his horror narratives, Peele creates a richer, more complex experience for the audience. Another way Peele subverts expectations is by playing with genre conventions. Get Out, for example, starts off as a classic horror movie setup, with a young black man visiting his white girlfriend's family in the suburbs. However, as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that things are not as they seem, and the film morphs into a hybrid of horror, comedy, and social satire. Similarly, Us starts off as a home invasion thriller, but quickly evolves into something much more surreal and unpredictable. Peele's approach to horror has been hugely influential, and has inspired other filmmakers to follow suit. One example of a movie that successfully subverted expectations in a similar way is Cabin in the Woods. This horror comedy starts off as a typical slasher movie, with a group of college students heading out to a remote cabin in the woods. However, as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that there is much more going on than meets the eye, and the film turns into a meta-commentary on the horror genre itself. In the world of horror gaming, the Silent Hill series is often cited as an example of successful subversion. These games use familiar horror tropes, such as eerie fog, creepy abandoned buildings, and twisted monsters, but then turn them on their head by adding layers of psychological horror and surrealism. Players are constantly kept on edge as they navigate through the game's nightmarish landscapes, never quite sure what is real and what is not. In summary, subverting expectations is a powerful tool in the horror filmmaker's arsenal. By taking familiar horror tropes and twisting them in unexpected ways, filmmakers can create truly unique and memorable experiences for their audience. Whether through exploring deeper themes and issues, playing with genre conventions, or adding layers of psychological horror, subverting expectations is a key principle that can help horror stand out in a crowded genre. Straight from the masters of the genre. Remember, less is more when it comes to horror. So always keep your audience on their toes and let their imaginations run wild. We hope you found this video informative and entertaining. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel for more content like this. Do you have any favorite horror movies or games that follow these rules? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay spooky.